It is a totally autonomous, solar-powered, infrastructure-independent security tower. So by placing these towers every few miles, you can end up with a nearly perfect picture of everything that's going on in a really large area. And then that data is very easy for an operator to read. These are being used right now by the DoD, by Department of Homeland Security along military bases, the border, and a lot of other critical infrastructure.
Anduril's future success relies largely on the military's continued concern that the U.S. could lose to China in an arms race based on artificial intelligence.
Our technology is far behind the consumer area in many places, and we're also far behind our adversaries in a lot of places. People should be more worried than they are about falling behind, because it's not something that's going to happen someday. It's already happened.
Critics say technologists like Lucky have an ethical duty to stay out of the weapons business, but neither the military nor Anduril's investors share their concerns. The company recently raised a $120 million investment round, valuing it at about $1 billion.
I'm Scarlet Fu, and this is Bloomberg Quick Take. Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking trial began this week in New York, and at the end of day 2, we heard from one of Jeffrey Epstein's female victims, as well as his former pilot. Ghislaine Maxwell, as you know, is charged with recruiting underage girls for Epstein and participating in some of his abuse of the girls. I want to bring in now Bloomberg News legal team editor and team leader, Katia Porzecanski, who has been following this trial from the very beginning when they began selecting the jury. Katia, thanks so much for speaking with us. I want to take a step back for a moment here and just talk to you about the framing of this trial, because opening arguments were yesterday. That's done. Witnesses are now testifying. What's the narrative that the prosecution has laid out, and what's the narrative that the defense has laid out?
Absolutely. So the prosecutors are going to be calling 4 alleged victims who are going to paint the picture of Ghislaine Maxwell's role in their abuse that took over, that was from decades ago, but that, they say have, permanently altered their lives. And they are going to basically talk about how she helped in bringing and sourcing girls for Jeffrey Epstein and grooming them for abuse, which took many different forms for the different women who were then girls. Whether it was paying for their school or being some sort of a role model or social source of support if they had sometimes like volatile lives. It was all part of a grooming process, and that's what they are alleging. And there are 6 counts against her, and the steepest one would carry a sentence of 40 years, and she's found guilty of that.
Okay, gotcha. So that's the prosecution's version, or the story that they're going to tell with the help of these 4 female victims as witnesses. How's the defense countering this? What is the defense saying about what Ghislaine Maxwell did or didn't do?
So the defense went right for it yesterday in their opening statements, basically saying that what we're going to hear is basically memories that are wrong, and that Ghislaine didn't have that role, that she is a scapegoat for Jeffrey Epstein, that basically because Jeffrey Epstein has committed suicide, there's no one else to blame, and so they're going after Ghislaine Maxwell, who was a ex-girlfriend of his and a property manager of his, and basically she's, as the attorney for Maxwell said yesterday, she's filling an empty seat. So which is an interesting argument also because she is a woman, and she's the first woman to go to trial in the Me Too era, in the post of the Me Too era. So it's an interesting question for a juror to face, given that mostly it's men in this position.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And it's notable here that the defendant is a woman, the prosecutor is a woman, the defendant's lead lawyer is a woman as well, and you have these 4 women who will be called up as witnesses. They were victims, they're all women, and the judge is a woman as well. We can get to that in a moment here, but I want to talk about what happened today on day 2 of the trial, because the former pilot of Jeffrey Epstein, his former private jet pilot, testified today, and I know a lot's going to be made of the fact that he name-checked a whole bunch of celebrities, like Chris Tucker, the comedian, Kevin Spacey, the actor, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, the former presidents. All that's interesting, and I'm sure it's going to make all the different tabloids. But what did we actually learn from this former pilot? What did we learn from his testimony?
So the pilot worked for Jeffrey Epstein for almost 30 years, piloting him around, and saw many, many people enter the jet over the course of that time. And basically, you know, he's testified over the course of 2 days. And on the first day, he was basically saying, well, you know, it's easier to fly private, a lot less hassle. So a lot of people like to fly private. So people would hitch rides on Jeffrey Epstein's jets. And then, you know, that's kind of what sets up him seeing a lot of these famous people. And it's, you know, again, these names that have been dropped are not new. They've been released, you know, in depositions over the years. But the key point of his presence on the stand was to basically say that he saw with his own eyes one of the victims on that jet. And that is Jane is her pseudonym. The women are going by pseudonyms. And saw her when she was given like a tour of the jet, and he noticed her. She had bright blue eyes. She appeared mature. To his knowledge, he never saw women under the age of, or what he expected was or thought was 20 on board. But that woman, prosecutors say, had been groomed and actually abused allegedly by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell starting from the age of 14, where they approached her at her art camp at Interlaken. And indeed, the pilot also did confirm that he flew the jet at one point to the nearest airport to Interlaken to pick up luggage. But so there are pieces there that are kind of painting a picture. But on cross-exam, they basically asked him, you know, like, what did you see? Did you see any wrongdoing? And he said that he never saw any females who appeared to be under the age of 20 during the 3 decades that he piloted the planes, nor any illegal activity aboard when he'd leave the cockpit to use the restroom. So it's a visual, you know, confirmation that victim was there under Epstein's watch. And then the government gave a list of birth certificates and flight records to the jury, presumably to show them the age of that witness, to say, yeah, she was underage.
Okay, so it's to place the fact that the victim was on the jet, even though the pilot himself said that the door between the cockpit and the rest of the private jet was always closed, so he didn't actually see anything, even if there was something to see or even if there wasn't anything to see. You had mentioned Jeffrey Epstein killed himself while he was in prison. He was awaiting trial at the time, so he never really had to face the music here. And so Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys have argued that she's kind of a convenient stand-in, a scapegoat, because he's not able to be held accountable for what is being alleged of him. So how much does his shadow loom over this trial? I mean, are people saying his name constantly? I assume they are, but how much deliberation is there when it comes to him versus Ghislaine Maxwell? Is it really a trial about him, or is it really about her?
Well, I mean, his shadow looms large. I mean, in so much of the testimony today, including right now, we have Jane, that minor victim. She's testifying as well today, and has been for the last couple hours. And it's a lot about the abuse that he committed, and it's heavy. I mean, it's really dark. The allegations that she makes, especially given how young she was, and the role that he played in kind of giving her an apartment, and giving her schooling, and it's all a part of the grooming process that's where Maxwell comes in. And she did describe that Maxwell was present when he would abuse her, to give her a sense of, oh, this is fine, this is normal, I'm right here. And that's, so Epstein's role in the crimes is massive, but it sets the stage to ask, well, what was Maxwell's role in those crimes? Yeah. And that's what the point of the trial is.
So she has been detained, and she's been in prison for months now. We're seeing her in court. What do the reporters who are at the courthouse every day, you are editing their stories, you're constantly in communication with them. What are they saying about how Ghislaine Maxwell presents? What is she like? What's her body language like during these testimonies?
It seems like she's been pretty reserved and quiet. At least that's what it sounds like. She hugs her attorneys when she gets into court and when she leaves at the end. But so far there's been, looking at the jury or looking at the victims, but not a lot to say about her demeanor so far. She's been pretty composed.
Gotcha.
There hasn't been anything to write about what she's been doing.
And I'm sure that's the way that her defense attorney wants it too. I mentioned earlier how it feels like an all-women trial: female judge, female defendant, female prosecutor, 4 female witnesses, one of whom already testified today. What do we know about the jury? You were there at the beginning when the attorneys were picking the juries. What can you tell us about the jury and how they are responding to this very female-dominated trial?
Well, we have no idea what they're thinking, but the jury is a fairly good representation of New Yorkers, it sounds like, from their bios. We were able to piece together from transcripts what they do for a living, what their general demographics are, how exposed they had been to this trial or to the characters before, which was really interesting because it had been kind of made a point, like, where are you going to find people that have never heard of Jeffrey Epstein?
Exactly.
for this trial? But they did. I mean, they didn't find people that have never heard of Jeffrey Epstein, but a lot of them were like, oh, I flipped the channel. Like, I saw something, but I flipped the channel. We've got home health aides, we've got government workers, like an advertising guy. And in terms of their gender makeup, we don't have that confirmed yet. But it seems like a pretty balanced representation. And actually, one of the jurors got excused today because he had a surprise Christmas vacation planned. And so last minute, they had to change out a juror, which, everyone was probably cursing at the sky that this one person got to leave and enjoy his holidays.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. Especially since we're only at the beginning of this trial. Very quickly, as we wrap up here, Katia, what are you looking for in the coming days? What do you think you guys will be writing on as kind of the sidebar to what else is happening day in and day out through this trial?
I think what I'm very interested in is the, just exactly painting the picture of their environment and who was in there and, who the witnesses are. Like, we have no idea who the witnesses in this trial are going to be, which is really interesting because sometimes you get a witness list, but in this case it's sealed. So it's actually a surprise, like, almost every time. So it'll be really interesting to see who's coming to speak. Obviously, we're going to have the 4 women in total speak, but then all the women, any people that saw them. We never know. It's unlikely that there are going to be any surprises in terms of name drops, but it could be that there are some surprises in terms of what those people did or saw. And I think we'll hopefully. I mean, I don't know. We'll probably hear from more women who might not be one of the minor victims, but might be called to corroborate or to explain a little bit more or give credibility to those women. So it's going to be a really interesting trial. It's a window into a very seedy underbelly of Manhattan wealth and Florida wealth, and so I think that's why there's so much interest in this case, given that it seemed to have happened right in front of a lot of people's faces, and a lot of those people are famous people.
Yeah. Definitely. Feels like it could be something that was made up for HBO Max or Netflix if it weren't for the fact that it's true. Katia, thank you so much. Katia Porzecanski, Bloomberg News legal team leader and editor. Really appreciate your joining us.